is made up of people from all over. And so let's go back and look at the French colonies that are in what is now the United States. We're going to have quite a few new areas settled by the French in the 1700s. And we're going to go down to the Gulf Coast. If we look here at this map, we can see that the French territories are in the heart of the United States, up and down the Mississippi River Valley and the Great Lakes region, in addition to Canada to the north. But in 1702, the French are going to found Mobile in what is now Alabama as the capital of Louisiana. They are going to go up the Mississippi River,
Okay.
and Natchez, Mississippi is going to be founded in 1716 because they are beginning to trade extensively with the Natchez Indians. And this also is a place along the river in between the settlements of Illinois that we have already seen, as also the settlements down on the Gulf Coast. And so Natchez is just going to be another station along this river-bound trade route. We're also going to see by the time we get to 1763, which is actually at the end of French territories in what is now the United States, we're going to see a Frenchman named Pierre Laclede, who is from New Orleans, who is going to found St. Louis. And St. Louis is named after the King of France, one of the kings of France. And St. Louis is founded first as Laclede's village, but it will go as a trading outpost, and for the same reason why the Mississippians wanted a major settlement in Cahokia, there along the river, is the same reason why the French want to be there. This is where several of the rivers come within 100 miles up and down the Mississippi. This is where several of the great rivers come into the Mississippi. And so St. Louis is directly opposite from where Cahokia was. But we also have the French making more and more of these small outpost sort of settlements throughout Illinois. And if we look at this map here, all the little dots represent French towns, French villages. But we have to look at the founding of New Orleans itself. In 1718, there's this they want to found a city. Remember, Mobile is the capital at first, but there's this idea that Mobile is not at the mouth of the Mississippi. And so they want a settlement at the mouth of the Mississippi to control the Mississippi from the Spanish and also from the British. And so Bienville is going to come here and is going to pick out the site for New Orleans, and founds what we now know as the French Quarter. Many of you might have visited this, and so this is the area that's founded by the French. This is the highest ground in New Orleans. If you remember back to Katrina, the French Quarter itself did not flood. This is the highest ground in the area. And so by 1722, New Orleans is the capital of French Louisiana. And in a few moments, we're going to look at what the Spanish do to react to the founding of New Orleans. But in 1763, and we'll see why later on, when the French are going to hand over Louisiana to Spanish control, New Orleans will become Spanish. And so in 1788, a major fire will sweep through the city. And so what we actually call the French Quarter, they have to rebuild the city. It's rebuilt in the Spanish colonial architectural style. So the French Quarter architecture is actually Spanish. But who lives here are still mostly French, even though it's under the control of the Spanish government. And it's a very interesting dynamic here, because it's a very French city, but it also has all of these Spanish overlays that comes from the people who control the city. And that takes us to the Spanish. Now, if we want to look at the Spanish Southwest, we're looking at California, Texas, and New Mexico. These are defensive settlements. They are trying to protect the back door to their silver mines, the silver mines in Zacatecas, which are very, very important to the Spanish economy, to the Spanish Empire. Think about this. You already have the French on the Mississippi River. Remember how they wanted to root out LaSalle and all of that. You also have the British on the coast, and This concept that someone could come through the back door more easily to get to the silver is always uppermost in the Spanish government's mind. And so these are defensive settlements meant to hold that northern frontier. And so we're going to have presidios, which is Spanish, forts. We're going to have the ranches that supply the forts, and they're going to be missions to the Indians. And so this is why it's small scale settlement. A lot of running of cattle, um, a little bit of agriculture to support feeding that region, but mostly missions to Indians. I mean, if you think about San Antonio, San Antonio is going to be one of these. But if you think about all of the missions that we have in Texas from San Antonio southward, this is what's going on. So let's look at Texas in particular. Texas has had settlements in it before 1718, but San Antonio is going to be founded as the capital uh, of this province of Texas in 1718. Now think about the dates we just talked about for French Louisiana. As the French start to settle more towns, start to occupy more territory in French Louisiana, the Spanish feel that they must respond. And so now they're going to beef up this Presidio Ranch mission frontier. And if you look at where the settlement is in the dark sort of greenish area, this is the area of Texas originally within the Spanish Empire. And note that it is a buffer. It is trying to hold that territory to prevent the French from coming down along what is now the Texas coast and getting into Mexico. And so it's going to be this mission and presidio frontier with cattle ranching. But one thing they did discover is that Texas, just as we know today, is great for growing grapes, which you don't have as much of when you get further south into Mexico. And so this is a very important um, occupation in early Texas is making wine. If we go further west into California, we have the first missions founded much later, mid-century, by Junipero Serra. And as they move northward along the coast, they're actually trying to hold the territory against someone else that we'll talk about in a few minutes. I won't tell you who it is right now. But San Diego is founded in 1769. Los Angeles, as a very small, very sleepy village, is founded in 1781. So all the way up to San Francisco, we are going to have, if you look at this map, they are well spaced out, evenly spaced out up and down the coast between San Francisco and San Diego. We see a series of missions to the Indians of California, along with, interspersed with forts, and then the ranches and the haciendas to support the forts. And this brings us to mid-century. Once Spain gets a lot of this territory that is Louisiana after 1763, but also as we have a change of kings, the king will send out what they called a visitor general, a visitador, who is going to come and look at more efficient ways to organize the empire, to make it profitable once again, to try to increase the output of the silver mines, to reorganize the bureaucracy and the government, to be more efficient in tax collection. In other words, to just make this a well-oiled imperial machine. And so we call these in Latin American history the Bourbon Reforms. And the Bourbons had come in. A branch of the family out of France had taken the throne of Spain. We'll talk about that when we talk about imperial wars in topic 7. But they're bringing in some of the French organization of empire here. And the visitador that comes in to New Spain is named Jose de Galvez. And Galvez, that name should sound familiar. Galveston is named after the Galvez family, Galveston, Texas. And he's going to take this long extended tour of New Spain. And he looks and he says, we need to settle Alta California, what we call California today, more, to hold it against this new threat to Spanish territory. And we also just need to reorganize this whole buffer, this whole northern frontier buffer, to protect the silver mines. And so he creates what are called the internal provinces, the provincias internas. And this will include Texas, California, New Mexico, and the northern tier of the modern Mexican states, northern states. And all of these will be put over one overarching bureaucratic control. And this is a defensive maneuver. But also it is to stimulate economic development, because it's easier to get people to want to move to a far frontier, and if you have more people along the frontier, it's more defended. And so this was going to stimulate economic development. It's going to provide the solid defensive line. The French are gone, but the British are still there, and one other. And also, there are problems with the Apaches in particular, the Comanche in Texas, the British, and, oh, I've given it away, the Russians. We're going to be talking about the Russians in a minute. But we will talk later on about the expansion of the Comanche. And so part of this is a defense against Indians as well. But the Galvez family is very important to the history of the American Southwest, and especially to the history of the state of Texas. So we have Jose, who creates the internal provinces. After his time here as the Visitor General, he will go back to Spain, where he becomes the Minister of the Indies, the person in charge day to day of everything that goes on in the entire hemisphere of the Americas, second only to the king, and how the Americas are governed. And so he will appoint his brother, Matthias, as the Viceroy of New Spain. So you have Jose, the older brother, who's in charge of all of the Americas, Matthias, who is in charge of New Spain. And so this is why Galveston is named after. I mean, this is a very, very important family, but there's one other member that actually is going to become even more important to American history. And that member is Bernardo. And Bernardo comes up through the military ranks. He, as a young man, is going to be made the military commander along the northern frontier. So he will be in charge of the military, the Spanish Imperial military in Texas and New Mexico. And he is the one that is going to push the Apache. The Comanche have also been putting pressure on the Apache, but he will push the Apache west of the Pecos River to make the route up to Santa Fe and into southern Texas safe. Because of his success here, he is going to be named first military commander when the Spanish received New Orleans and French Louisiana. But then he will become the governor of Spanish Louisiana. And he is the governor of Spanish Louisiana during the American Revolution. And when we get to the American Revolution, we're going to come back and look at Bernardo again. But he is going to be the commander of the Spanish forces that are fighting in the southeastern United States during the American Revolution. And what he does play a pivotal key in the ultimate victory of the Patriots in the American Revolution. And after all of this is done, he is going to succeed his father Matthias as Viceroy of New Spain in 1785. And so for the end of, for quite a number of years, Texas will be under the direct control of Bernardo, as well as New Mexico and California, in his role as the Viceroy of all of New Spain. But now we've got to get to those Russians, and yes, indeed, we do have a Russian presence. Now, I know most American history books only look at the United States from those English settlements pushing west and occasionally bring up the Spanish and the French. But there is another colonial experience in what is now the United States, and that is the experience under the Russians. And so now we have to look at exploration of the northern Pacific coast. And this is carried out first in 728 by Vitus Bering, and he is the first European to prove that Asia and America are separate continents, which is why the Bering Strait is named after him. In 1741, Russia will formally claim what is now Alaska. And so it's going to be in fits and starts, this settlement of Alaska. Several Russian companies are created, similar to what we saw with the companies that settled the English colonies in North America. And what they are looking is the fur trade once again. But here it's going to be sea otter pelts. Sea otter pelts are very popular in China, and China, of course, is where everybody wants to trade with because of the silks, the porcelains, the teas, things like that. And so here we see something a little bit different from the beginning. The traders, instead of, unlike the French traders who move in with the Indians, who intermarry, who become part of Indian life, the Russian traders are going to move into a region. They are going to come in armed. They are going to take the women and the children hostage and force the men out to sea to hunt, and then bring back the pelts as the ransom for the women and children. And the Russian Orthodox priests, very similar to the Catholic priests in Spain, the Russian Orthodox priests are going to arrive later, and they will set up missions to the Aleuts. And so when the priests come in, the Russian priests look at this practice and they are absolutely horrified. And they try to put an end to this. And so the Russian Orthodox priests are seen as the guys with the white hats riding in to the rescue. And from this beginning, as protector of the native population, we will see that great inroads are made in the conversion of many Native Alaskans to Russian Orthodoxy, to Eastern Christianity. And if you go to Alaska today, you'll still see many Russian Orthodox churches all over Alaska, and many Native Alaskans are still Russian Orthodox to this day. But this is not going well for Russia. It's just sort of hit or miss. And when Catherine the Great is in power in 1784, this is about the time of the treaty that recognizes the United States with the rest of the European powers. Catherine the Great is on the throne, and she wants to more effectively govern her empire, and she wants to get more money from it. And she looks at these far colonies, that Alaska, and wants more than what's coming from it. And so she is going to grant Gregory Shelikoff a monopoly to developing Alaska and to stabilize Russian claims. She's concerned about the Spanish moving up the coast, and already we are going to see some of this. What are the Americans going to end up doing? Are they going to push westward or not now that they have a good chunk of the continent? Are they going to keep coming? And also the British, who are still up in Canada, have now come westward as well. And so now the Russians are trying to hold their claims against the new United States, the Spanish Empire, and the British Empire. And so Shelikoff is going to organize and lead the very first large-scale settlement beyond just traders and missionaries on Kodiak Island. And he's also going to found Sitka. And by 1812, under Shelikoff's Russian-American Company, Russians are all the way into Northern California. And by 1815, the Russians have even placed an outpost in the Hawaiian Islands looking for trade. So the Russians are definitely expanding in this area of Catherine up into, and even throughout the Napoleonic War period. Now let's go back to the English colonies. So we've kind of gone and looked at everybody else. Let's come back to the English. And we are now going to see settling between about 1700 and up to about 1760s. We are going to see the back country being settled. And the back country is this 800-mile swath from western Pennsylvania to western Georgia that's along the backbone of the Appalachians and the upcountry leading to the Appalachians. And the majority of the people who settle here are going to be Scots-Irish and German. They are not going to be English. And this is also, and on the other side of this settlement is what we call the middle ground. This area that's the frontier between all of the Indian tribes and Indian confederacies, and especially between the Iroquois and the French and the English on either side. Because remember, the French are still here at the point we're talking about. This is going to be the middle ground, and the middle ground is where you have this interaction between the Indians and also the European settlers. So who are these Scots-Irish? Scots-Irish are going to be pushed out of Northern Ireland by religious conflicts, by economic necessity. Um, they do not like the English. The English control Ireland. It was conquered by force. And so, and the Irish and the Scots and Scotland doesn't, the Scots don't particularly like Irish. And it's a long story of how Scots got to Northern Ireland. We'll just accept it and move on. But there is no love lost for the English. When the Scots-Irish come over, they don't like the English. They don't like British imperial rule to begin with. And if they didn't like it at home, they're not going to like it here. And they first are going to settle in the middle colonies, especially western Pennsylvania. And once they get to western Pennsylvania, they start to move southward into Virginia's Shenandoah Valley, which is a big, broad, beautiful valley, good for farming. And then to the North Carolina Piedmont, and finally the upcountry of South Carolina. So they're moving southward along the spine of the Appalachians. They have no respect for the British imperial government, and they have even less respect for the colonial governments. They are considered disruptive by the colonial governments along the eastern seaboard, and they often refuse to pay for the land. They are considered to be squatters in many cases. They refuse to pay rent to the people who say they own the land, who are not out there, because it's these eastern elites that have already laid claim to the land out here. And they often refuse to pay their taxes to either the colonial government or to the imperial government. However, they become known as frontiersmen, Indian fighters. Think in popular culture images, think Daniel Boone with his coonskin hat, and you've got a pretty good image. The Germans are coming in because of widespread warfare in Germany. There's not an actual German state yet. There's lots of smaller principalities that are often fighting each other. And so most Germans come to escape this widespread warfare. When they settle in Pennsylvania, they are greatly admired because they are peaceful, they are hardworking, they quickly bring the wilderness under control, set up well-run farms, and pretty much don't cause any problems at all, in comparison to the Scots-Irish, who cause lots of problems. You see them mostly in Pennsylvania, but they follow the same path as the Scots-Irish, and you will see pockets of them on both sides of the Appalachians well before the American Revolution, all the way down into North Georgia. They want to maintain their own culture, though. They want to maintain their religion. They want to use their own language. And so because they are so successful and they tend to become wealthier, and they have a culture which is separate and different, it sometimes arouses some prejudice among the other colonists. And what's really interesting is as their numbers increase in Pennsylvania, Ben Franklin, who is normally known as someone who's incredibly tolerant of others, he has great relations with the Indians, with people of all socioeconomic statuses, and is someone who is in favor of a more open society. He actually seeks to limit the immigration of Germans because he feels Pennsylvania is becoming too German. And one of his arguments, think about this for a minute, is he says that Germans aren't white. And we talked about in topic 5 the concept of whiteness. Here he is saying that Germans aren't white. And at this point he's meaning English or Anglo. But they are, because Anglo-Saxons, Germans and English are very closely related to each other, but he's saying Germans aren't white. But what of this middle ground? This is this Trans-Appalachian region. It's the area between the imperial powers. This is where the Indians are. They are regrouping, they're forming new nations. We have the ever-strengthening Iroquois nation here. They are interacting with each other. They are interacting with Europeans. And besides the Iroquois, if we move further south and further west into Ohio, we're thinking about not only Iroquois, but Cherokees and the Shawnees in particular are very successful in this middle ground. And frontiers are where the most interesting things happen in societies, where the cultural exchanges occur, and where the imperial control is the least.